I never thought it would happen to me. Not us. Not after everything we'd been through. My name is Daniel Harper, and this is the story of how my life was shattered, rebuilt, and ultimately reclaimed. It's a story of love, betrayal, and revenge, but also of redemption. And it all started on an ordinary Tuesday in suburban Chicago. Sarah and I had been married for 12 years. We met in college, 2 kids with big dreams. She was studying journalism and I was an engineering major. We were the couple everyone envied, always laughing, always together. We built a life, a cozy house in the suburbs, 2 kids, Emily, 10, and Jake, 7, and a golden retriever named Max. From the outside, it was perfect. But perfection is a fragile thing. That Tuesday, I came home early from work. It was rare for me to leave the office before 6, but I'd been feeling off all day. A gnawing unease I couldn't shake. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Sarah's car was gone. Odd. She usually worked from home on Tuesdays. I let myself in, calling out her name. No answer. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I checked my phone. No messages. I texted her, "Hey, where are you?" No reply. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. That's when I noticed something on the dining table, a receipt from a local cafe. The timestamp was from an hour ago. Sarah's handwriting on the back, meeting with Mark. Back by 3. Mark, her coworker. I'd heard his name before. He was the new guy at her magazine, some hotshot photographer from New York. Sarah had mentioned him a few times, always casually, always with a smile. I hadn't thought much of it. Until now. I sat down, my mind racing. Why would she meet him during work hours? Why wouldn't she tell me? I tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to me like shadows. When Sarah finally walked through the door at 3:15, she looked different. Flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, you're home early," she said, setting her bag down. "Yeah, I wasn't feeling great," I replied, watching her carefully. "Where were you?" "Oh, just running errands," she said too quickly. Grabbed a coffee, picked up some groceries. I held up the receipt. "With Mark?" Her face froze for a split second, then she laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Oh, right, I forgot. He wanted to go over some ideas for the next issue. It was last minute." I nodded, but something in her tone didn't sit right. She was hiding something. I could feel it in my gut. But I didn't press her, not then. Instead, I kissed her on the cheek and told her I was going to lie down. As I walked away, I caught her glancing at her phone, a flicker of guilt in her eyes. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sarah slept soundly beside me, her breathing steady, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, very wrong. And so, I made a decision. If Sarah was hiding something, I would find out what it was, no matter the cost. The next few days were a blur. I tried to act normal, smiling at Sarah, helping the kids with their homework, playing fetch with Max in the backyard. But inside, I was a storm of suspicion and dread. I started noticing little things. The way Sarah's phone was always face down, how she'd leave the room to take calls, the faint scent of cologne on her jacket, a cologne that wasn't mine. I decided to dig deeper. I'm not proud of it, but I went through her phone one night while she was in the shower. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. Most were harmless. Group chats with her coworkers, texts from her mom, reminders about the kids' soccer games. But then I saw it, a thread with Mark. The messages were innocent at first, work-related stuff, brainstorming ideas for articles. But then they took a turn, flirtatious jokes, compliments. "You looked amazing today," he'd written. "Thanks, you're not so bad yourself," she'd replied. My stomach churned as I read on. They'd been meeting up for weeks. Coffee shops, parks, even a hotel downtown. The last message was from earlier that day. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place?" I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My wife, the woman I'd loved for over a decade, the mother of my children, was having an affair. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. Instead, I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and went to bed, my mind racing. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I told Sarah I had a migraine and needed to rest. She kissed my forehead and left with the kids, her usual cheerful self. As soon as the door closed, I sprang into action. I grabbed my laptop and started researching Mark. Social media, LinkedIn, anything I could find. He was 34, single, and apparently quite the charmer. His Instagram was full of photos from exotic locations, Paris, Tokyo, Rio, always with a beautiful woman on his arm. I felt a surge of anger. This guy thought he could waltz into my life and take everything I'd worked for? Not a chance. But I knew I had to be smart about this. If I confronted Sarah now, she'd deny it, or worse, leave me and take the kids. I couldn't let that happen. No, I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. That afternoon, I followed her. I borrowed a friend's car, a nondescript sedan, and parked down the street from her office. At 2:30, she emerged, glancing around nervously before heading to a nearby cafe. My heart pounded as I watched her sit down at a table. A few minutes later, Mark showed up. He was tall, with dark hair and a confident swagger. They laughed together, leaning in close. At one point, he reached across the table and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. I took photos with my phone, my hands trembling. This was it, the evidence I needed. But as I watched them, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. This was about justice, about making them both pay for what they'd done. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. I couldn't just expose the affair. I had to destroy it, and him. But how? I needed a plan, something clever, something brutal. That night, I sat down at my desk and started drafting an email. It was addressed to Mark, but I had no intention of sending it, not yet. It was a decoy, a way to lure him into a false sense of security. The subject line read, "We need to talk." The body was simple. "I know about you and Sarah. Meet me tomorrow at 7 p.m. Don't tell her." I attached one of the photos I'd taken, a clear shot of them holding hands. I saved the email as a draft and leaned back in my chair, a grim smile on my face. The game was on, and I was just getting started. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I barely slept, my mind consumed by thoughts of revenge and the intricate web I was weaving. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. Every time I looked at Sarah, I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. How could she do this to us, to our family? But I kept my composure, playing the role of the oblivious husband. I even made her favorite dinner, lasagna, and pretended everything was fine. Meanwhile, I finalized my plan. I sent the email to Mark from a fake account, making sure it looked convincing. I chose a quiet, secluded spot for our meeting, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was perfect. No witnesses, no cameras, just me and him. At 6:30 p.m., I told Sarah I was going out for a drink with an old college friend. She barely looked up from her laptop, muttering, "Okay, have fun." I kissed the kids goodnight, my heart aching as I hugged them a little tighter than usual. Then I grabbed my jacket and left, my phone buzzing with a text from Mark, "I'll be there." The drive to the warehouse was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I kept replaying the images in my head, Sarah and Mark laughing, touching, betraying me. By the time I arrived, I was seething. I parked a block away and walked the rest, my footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The warehouse was dark and eerie, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. I found a spot near the back and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. At exactly 7 p.m., I heard the creak of the door opening. Mark stepped inside, his silhouette outlined by the dim light from the street. He looked nervous, glancing around as he called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" I stepped out of the shadows, my voice cold and steady. "I'm here." He froze, his eyes widening as he recognized me. "Daniel, what the hell is this?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo of him and Sarah. His face went pale. "Listen, man, I can explain." "Save it," I snapped, cutting him off. "I know everything. And now you're going to listen to me." He held up his hands, trying to look calm. but I could see the fear in his eyes. Okay. What do you want? I took a step closer, my voice low and menacing. I want you to leave my wife alone. I want you to quit your job and get out of this city. And if you ever come near her again, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done. Your career, your reputation, it'll all be over. He swallowed hard, nodding quickly. Fine, I'll do it. Just don't tell anyone, okay? I smirked, feeling a surge of satisfaction. Good. Now get out of here. He turned and practically ran out of the warehouse, his footsteps echoing in the silence. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, my hands clenched into fists. It felt good to see him scared, to know I had the upper hand. But this was only the beginning. When I got home, Sarah was in bed, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, her expression unreadable. "How was your night?" she asked casually. I forced a smile. It was fine, just catching up with an old friend. She nodded, her eyes lingering on me for a moment before she went back to her phone. I changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed beside her, my mind racing. I'd dealt with Mark, but Sarah was a different story. She was the one who had betrayed me, who had shattered our family, and she was going to pay. The next few weeks were a strange mix of tension and normalcy. Mark quit his job and moved back to New York just as I'd demanded. Sarah seemed off, distracted, distant, but she didn't mention him. I didn't either. I played my part perfectly, acting like the doting husband and father. But inside, I was biding my time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I started digging deeper into Sarah's life, looking for leverage. I went through her emails, her social media, even her old journals. What I found shocked me. It wasn't just Mark. There had been others, flings, emotional affairs, even a one-night stand during a work trip 2 years ago. Each discovery felt like a knife to the heart, but I used the pain to fuel my resolve. She had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined, and I was going to make sure she paid for every single one. One night, after the kids were asleep, I confronted her. I didn't yell or scream. I was calm, calculated. I sat her down at the kitchen table and laid out the evidence, photos, emails, journal entries. Her face went pale as she realized what I'd uncovered. "Daniel, she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you, but you did," I said coldly. "You hurt me, you hurt our family, and now you're going to face the consequences." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "What are you going to do?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "First, you're going to sign a postnuptial agreement. If you ever cheat again, or even think about it, you get nothing. No alimony, no custody, nothing. Second, you're going to quit your job. No more late nights, no more work trips. You're going to focus on being a mother and a wife. And third, you're going to tell me everything, every lie, every betrayal. No more secrets." She stared at me, her mouth hanging open. "Daniel, you can't be serious." "I'm dead serious," I said, my voice like steel. "You have two choices. Agree to my terms, or I file for divorce and take the kids. Your call." She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. She had brought this on herself. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The next day, we met with a lawyer and drafted the agreement. Sarah signed it without protest, her hands trembling. I felt a surge of triumph, but it was short-lived. This wasn't just about control, it was about justice. And I wasn't done yet. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of victory and emptiness. Sarah quit her job, just as I'd demanded, and threw herself into being a stay-at-home mom. She was attentive, almost overly so, as if trying to make up for what she'd done. But the damage was irreparable. Every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal. Every time she smiled, I wondered if it was genuine or just another act. The kids noticed the tension, of course. Emily, my perceptive 10-year-old, started asking questions. "Why doesn't Mom go to work anymore?" she asked one evening over dinner. "And why do you and Mom never talk?" I forced a smile, ruffling her hair. "Mom just wanted to spend more time with you guys. And we talk, just not as much as we used to." Emily frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the answer, but she didn't press further. Jake, my 7-year-old, seemed oblivious, too caught up in his Legos and cartoons to notice the cracks in our family. I was grateful for that, at least. But while Sarah was playing the role of the repentant wife, I was busy plotting the next phase of my revenge. I'd dealt with Mark, and I'd forced Sarah into submission, but I wasn't done. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done, to understand the pain she'd caused me, and I knew exactly how to make that happen. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat down at my computer and started drafting an email. It was addressed to Sarah's parents, her siblings, and her closest friends. The subject line read, "The truth about Sarah." The body of the email was a detailed account of her infidelity, complete with dates, names, and screenshots of incriminating messages. I didn't send it, not yet. I saved it as a draft, a ticking time bomb waiting to be detonated. The next morning I called Sarah into my home office. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting as she sat down across from me. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice trembling. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "I want to talk about trust." She flinched, her eyes dropping to the floor. "Daniel, I've done everything you asked. I've been honest with you. Have you?" I interrupted, my voice sharp, "because I'm not sure you understand the gravity of what you've done. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our family. You risked everything we've built for a few moments of, what, excitement? Validation?" She started to cry, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "I know, Daniel. I know I messed up. I'll do anything to make it right." I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "Here's what's going to happen. I've written an email detailing everything you've done, every affair, every lie. I'm going to send it to your parents, your siblings, your friends. Unless, of course, you agree to my terms." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "Daniel, please, you can't do that. It'll destroy me." "That's the point," I said coldly. "But I'm willing to give you a choice. You can either live with the consequences of your actions or you can leave. Pack your things, walk away, and I'll keep this between us. But if you stay, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." She stared at me, her face pale and tear-streaked. For a moment I thought she might argue, might try to fight back, but then her shoulders slumped and she nodded. "I'll leave," she whispered. "Just, please don't send that email." I felt a surge of triumph, but it was hollow. This wasn't the happy ending I'd imagined. This was just the beginning of the end. Sarah moved out the following weekend. She packed her things quietly, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were in a daze. The kids were confused, especially Emily, who kept asking why Mommy was leaving. Sarah told them she needed some time to herself, that she'd be staying with Grandma for a while. It was a weak explanation, but it was all she could offer without revealing the truth. I stood in the doorway, watching as she loaded the last of her bags into her car. She turned to me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Daniel, she began, but her voice broke. She shook her head and climbed into the driver's seat without another word. As her car disappeared down the street, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, anger. I'd won, hadn't I? I'd exposed her lies, forced her out of my life, and protected my family. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a hollow ache, a void that nothing could fill. The kids took it hard. Emily became withdrawn, spending hours in her room with her headphones on. Jake started acting out, throwing tantrums and refusing to do his homework. I tried to be there for them, to reassure them that everything would be okay, but I felt like a fraud. How could I comfort them when I was barely holding myself together? Work became my escape. I threw myself into my projects, staying late at the office and volunteering for every extra assignment. My colleagues noticed the change, but no one said anything. They just assumed I was going through a rough patch, and I didn't correct them, let them think what they wanted. I didn't have the energy to explain. Meanwhile, Sarah's life began to unravel. She moved in with her mother, who was less than sympathetic. Her friends stopped calling, and her social media accounts went silent. I didn't send the email, I'd kept my word, but word of her infidelity spread anyway. Small towns have a way of sniffing out scandal, and ours was no exception. One evening, about a month after she left, Sarah showed up at the house unannounced. I was in the kitchen, helping Jake with his math homework, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking tired and disheveled. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her eyes pleading. "I can't do this anymore. I miss the kids. I miss you. I know I messed up, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, just give me another chance." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to say yes, to let her back into our lives and pretend none of this had happened. But the other part, the part that had been betrayed, humiliated, and broken, knew better. "It's too late, Sarah," I said quietly. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." She started to cry, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "I don't know how to fix this," she sobbed. "I don't know how to move on." I felt a pang of sympathy, but I pushed it aside. "That's not my problem anymore," I said, my voice cold. "Goodbye, Sarah." I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. As I leaned against it, listening to her muffled sobs on the other side, I felt a strange sense of closure. It was over. Finally, it was over. Life after Sarah's departure was different. The house felt emptier, quieter, but also lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The kids adjusted slowly, their routine stabilizing as the weeks turned into months. Emily started opening up again, her laughter filling the house in a way it hadn't in a long time. Jake's tantrums became less frequent, replaced by his usual goofy antics. Even Max seemed happier, his tail wagging more often as if he sensed the tension had lifted. I threw myself into being a single dad. I learned how to braid Emily's hair, helped Jake with his soccer practice, and even attempted baking cookies, which admittedly ended in a minor kitchen fire. It wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly present in my own life. Work, however, became a different story. My boss, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, called me into her office one afternoon. "Daniel, you've been doing great work lately," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But you're burning the candle at both ends. You've got dark circles under your eyes, and you're snapping at people in meetings. What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. But Linda had always been straightforward with me, and I figured I owed her the same. "My wife and I separated," I said finally. "It's been a lot." She nodded, her expression softening. "I'm sorry to hear that. But you need to take care of yourself, Daniel. You're no good to anyone if you're running on empty." Her words stuck with me. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat down with a glass of wine and did something I hadn't done in years. I thought about what I wanted. Not what Sarah wanted, not what the kids needed, but what I needed. And for the first time, I allowed myself to dream. I started small. I joined a gym, not because I particularly enjoyed working out, but because it gave me an hour to myself every day. I reconnected with old friends, guys I hadn't seen since college, and we started meeting up for poker nights. I even signed up for a cooking class, determined to master something beyond frozen pizza and spaghetti. But the biggest change came when I decided to pursue a passion I'd long abandoned: photography. I'd always loved taking pictures, but life and Sarah had pushed it to the sidelines. I dug out my old camera, dusted it off, and started shooting again. At first, it was just landscapes and candid shots of the kids. But then I started experimenting, capturing the world in ways I'd never dared before. One weekend, I took the kids on a road trip to the Grand Canyon. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but Sarah had never been interested. As we stood on the edge of the canyon, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I snapped a photo of Emily and Jake, their silhouettes framed against the vast expanse, and knew it was one of the best shots I'd ever taken. When we got home, I uploaded the photo to a photography contest on a whim. I didn't expect anything to come of it. It was just a way to challenge myself. But a few weeks later, I got an email. I'd won second place. The prize wasn't much, a small cash award and a feature in a local magazine, but it was enough to reignite a spark I thought had died. I started taking on freelance photography gigs, shooting weddings and family portraits on the weekends. It wasn't enough to quit my day job, but it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Sarah's life continued to spiral. She'd moved out of her mother's house and into a small apartment, but she struggled to find steady work. Her reputation in our small town had taken a hit, and she was often the subject of gossip. I tried not to dwell on it, but part of me couldn't help feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. But as the months passed, my anger began to fade. I realized I didn't hate Sarah, not anymore. I pitied her. She'd thrown away everything we'd built for fleeting moments of excitement, and now she was paying the price. I didn't want her to suffer, I just wanted to move on. And for the first time, I felt like I could. A year had passed since Sarah left, and life had settled into a new rhythm. The kids were thriving, my photography gigs were picking up, and I'd even started dating again, casually, nothing serious. I wasn't ready to dive into another relationship, but it felt good to laugh and flirt and remember that I was more than just a dad or a betrayed husband. But then, one rainy afternoon, everything changed. I was at the grocery store pushing a cart full of cereal and milk when I ran into Sarah. She looked different. Thinner, her hair shorter, her eyes tired. She was holding a basket with a few essentials, bread, peanut butter, a bottle of cheap wine. When she saw me, she froze, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Daniel," she said, forcing a smile. "Hi." "Sarah," I replied, my voice neutral. "How are you?" She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I've been better, but I'm managing." We stood there for a moment, the awkward silence stretching between us. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "I heard about your photography. That's amazing, Daniel. I always knew you had it in you." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "Thanks. It's been therapeutic." She hesitated, then blurted out, "I miss the kids. I miss you. I know I don't deserve it, but I'd give anything to go back and fix what I broke." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For so long I'd wanted to hear her say that, to admit she'd made a mistake, to show remorse. But now that she had, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a quiet acceptance. "Sarah," I said gently, "you can't go back." "None of us can. All we can do is move forward." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know, I hope you can forgive me someday." I didn't answer. I didn't know if I could. But for the first time, I realized I didn't need to. Forgiveness wasn't about her, it was about me, and I was finally ready to let go. The encounter with Sarah at the grocery store stayed with me. Her words, her tears, her obvious regret, it all lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. But instead of letting it consume me, I used it as fuel to keep moving forward. I had a life to rebuild, and I wasn't going to let her mistakes define me anymore. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected call. It was from a gallery in downtown Chicago. The owner, a woman named Clara, had seen my winning photo from the contest and wanted to feature my work in an upcoming exhibit. I was stunned. Me? In a gallery? It felt surreal, but I didn't hesitate to say yes. The exhibit was a turning point. My photos, landscapes, candid shots of the kids, even a few abstract pieces, were displayed alongside works from established artists. The opening night was packed, and for the first time in years I felt a sense of pride that wasn't tied to my job or my role as a dad. This was mine. My passion, my talent, my success. But the night wasn't without its surprises. As I mingled with guests, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Sarah. She was standing in front of one of my photos, a shot of Emily and Jake playing in the backyard, their laughter frozen in time. She looked different, not just physically, but emotionally. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a humility that hadn't been there before. I approached her cautiously, unsure of what to say. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, "I didn't expect to see you here." She turned to me, her eyes glistening with tears. "I saw the ad in the paper. I had to come. These photos, they're beautiful, Daniel. You've always had a gift." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. "Thank you." She hesitated, then said, "I'm proud of you. I know I don't have the right to say that, but I am. You've done so well for yourself and the kids. I just wanted you to know that." Her words caught me off guard. For so long I'd wanted her to acknowledge my pain, to take responsibility for what she'd done. And now here she was, doing just that. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. "Thank you, Sarah," I said quietly. "That means a lot." We stood there for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "I'm seeing a therapist, trying to work through everything. I know it doesn't change what I did, but I want to be better. For the kids, for myself, maybe even for you someday." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "That's good, Sarah. I'm glad." She smiled, a small, fragile smile, and then turned to leave. As I watched her walk away, I felt a strange sense of closure. The anger, the bitterness, the need for revenge, it was all fading, replaced by something softer, something like peace. The gallery exhibit marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. My photography career took off in ways I never imagined. I started getting commissions for larger projects, and my work was featured in a few national publications. It was thrilling, but more than that, it was healing. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself, not just for my kids or my job. The kids were doing well too. Emily had started middle school and was thriving, her love for art and music blossoming under the encouragement of her teachers. Jake, now 8, had become the star of his soccer team, his boundless energy channeled into something positive. They still missed Sarah, of course, but they were resilient in a way only kids can be. They adapted, they grew, and they reminded me every day that life goes on. Sarah and I had reached a fragile truce. She was seeing the kids regularly, and while it wasn't always easy, I could see she was trying. She'd gotten a job as a receptionist at a small clinic, and while it wasn't glamorous, it was a step toward rebuilding her life. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it was civil, polite, and for now, that was enough. One evening, as I was editing photos in my home office, Emily came in and sat down on the edge of my desk. "Dad," she said, her voice hesitant, "can I ask you something?" I looked up, setting my work aside. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" She fiddled with the hem of her shirt, her brow furrowed. "Do you think Mom will ever live with us again?" Her question caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know, Em. Your mom and I, we've been through a lot, but we both love you and Jake more than anything. No matter what happens, that will never change." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I just miss how things used to be." "I know, kiddo," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I miss it too sometimes, but we're doing okay, aren't we?" She smiled, a little shyly. "Yeah, we are." Her words stayed with me long after she'd gone to bed. We were doing okay. Better than okay, really. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. A few months later, I met someone. Her name was Claire, and she was a writer who'd come to the gallery to interview me for a magazine feature. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of art and storytelling. She was kind, funny, and refreshingly honest, a stark contrast to the lies and secrets that had defined my marriage. We took things slow, but every moment with her felt like a gift, a reminder that love didn't have to be complicated or painful. Sarah, to her credit, handled the news with grace. "I'm happy for you, Daniel," she said one day when we crossed paths at the kids' school. "You deserve to be happy." Her words meant more than I expected. "Thank you, Sarah. I hope you find happiness too." She smiled, a little sadly. "I'm working on it. As for Mark, I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to Los Angeles and was struggling to make it as a freelance photographer. I didn't feel any satisfaction in his downfall, just a quiet acknowledgement that karma had a way of balancing the scales. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Better than I ever thought it could be after everything that had happened. I'd learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing the past. It was about freeing yourself from its hold. And in letting go of the anger and pain, I'd found a new sense of purpose, a new kind of happiness. One evening, as I stood on the porch watching Emily and Jake play in the yard, Claire came up beside me and slipped her hand into mine. "They're amazing kids," she said softly. I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Yeah, they are." And in that moment, surrounded by the people I loved, I knew I'd finally found my way home.